My name is Richard Soley. I'm the chairman and CEO of the Object Management Group, which is a nearly 30-year-old standards organization, one of the largest standards organizations in the world, and amazingly based in Boston, and you've never heard of us. Object Management Group, short form is OMG, now you know why. Well, we owned OMG.com and sold it, which is now a site for entertainment news for teenage girls. So. But more relevant to today, I'm also the executive director of the Industrial Internet Consortium. The Industrial Internet Consortium is a group of 268 companies as of this morning from 31 countries. About 40% of them large companies, a little bit more than half of them small companies. The rest are government agencies, research institutions, universities. What we do is we build what we call test beds. It's essentially sandboxes. The idea is, how do you apply Internet of Things technology in industries? Healthcare, transportation, logistics, manufacturing, those all sorts of different industries. At this point, about a dozen. Amazing what you can do, for example, in precision agriculture and water management and other city management issues. And what we intend to do from these projects is learn how to apply IoT. That does not mean necessarily just the technology part. IoT is a fairly well understood technology. That is, to take information from a large number of sensors. After sensor integration, you do real-time predictive analytics. You deliver the results to decision makers to help them make decisions, or you deliver them directly to actuators in the real world to make things change in the real world. And I think that Chris is going to be talking about that as well. Those test beds are, for example, an electrical power generation, transmission, and distribution system in Southern California being moved to go live in San Antonio early next year. A smart cities system that is being built today in Southern Ireland to integrate the ambulance systems of County Cork with the national health resources of the national government of Ireland. A manufacturing solution which was built by Bosch, Tech Mahindra, Cisco, National Instruments, and SAP, which is being rolled out to all 250 Bosch manufacturing plants worldwide to optimize the use of the factory floors, basically just tracking everything on the floor, people, tools, parts, and work in progress. But we're not just learning about the technology, and the technology, as I was saying in the previous session, is fairly well understood. Even if application isn't necessarily understood. There's all sorts of other surrounding issues, such as how do you find people, how do you train people, how do you move people into the new levels of expertise that they have to have to build or use these sorts of systems. What standards are necessary? Everybody agrees we want interoperability and security. Nobody really agrees on what that is. So what standards do we need? And deliver those requirements and priorities for new standards to standards organizations, such as the OMG, which I also run, but also at this point, we talk to 33 other standards organizations, including ITU and ISO and IETF and many others, to deliver standards to solve these problems for real organizations. How do you involve small organizations? How do you involve governments? How do you tell governments what kind of regulation is important or necessary to solve the sort of privacy issues and so forth? We think the only way you get there is by building test beds. So I believe this session we promised to tell you why Boston should be the center of the test bed world in the IoT space, and yet I just told you about test beds in India and Ireland and Germany and one in the US. Maybe you want to hear about some local test beds.
So Chris Rezendes, born and raised in Fall River. Grandfathers are sweepers, and snuck in and out of Harvard. And right now we run something called Impact Labs, which is a living laboratory to test ideas about how we can instrument the physical world with intention and intelligence for profit and sustainability, so that we might have the chance to realize something we call resilience, which is profitability, sustainability, agility, security, and we would then say equality. I want to be really clear. This is not spotted owl, tongue-kissing, pinko tree hugging liberalism. This is not money-grubbing, dirtbag, marrow-sucking, extraction, hyper-concentrated capitalism.
Did you just make those up?
I did, just now. It kind of rolls off your tongue. It does, because we're so passionate about this idea that we just need to be a little bit more pragmatic, we think, in order to make more progress. But we think in order to make the progress, we've got to trust each other a little bit more, and we think trust is rooted in some truth, better truth, ground truth. In other words, the intentional and intelligent instrumentation of the physical world. We cannot have discussion or debate about groundwater rights unless everyone agrees to a set of facts about how much groundwater is available, and how the current groundwater level is different from what it might have been a year or 10 years ago, and how our development, redevelopment activities and consumption activities might change groundwater level in the future. In other words, we have no hope of making progress unless we can at least trust the facts upon which we're going to have a debate. So that's our passion. Deploying sensing and instrumentation in, on, or near the parts of the physical world that really do matter most to us. And we think that's natural resources, infrastructure, resilient cities, and food security. And so we've created a laboratory, we call it the Living Laboratory, in southeastern New England. We've got 5,000 square feet in New Bedford, which is a prototype. It's the archetype of the redeveloping market inside an advanced, developing, or less developed, or even frontier market. In other words, it's capital constrained, it's got mixed socioeconomic indicators. We have no PhDs from MIT, really, but we do have a whole bunch of intelligent, industrious, and intentional people who need to be taught. They need to be introduced to this idea of IoT. Because if we can instrument the physical world with intention and intelligence in capital constrained communities, then I think we really do have a chance of achieving some degree of global resilience in certain systems. If we only focus on the Fortune 5,000, if we only focus on the top 1%, if we only focus on the top 100 cities, I don't think we're going to get where we need to be. So our intention was, let's go to the place that looks like most of the rest of the world, and let's do small and mid-sized piloting live in the field with living, breathing small and mid-sized businesses. We have over 200 small and mid-sized businesses in southeastern New England that have invited us in. And they either keep their hands in their pockets and they say, come on and pilot, but I'm not touching it. And some will say, yes, I will look at it and I will tell you if it has an operational impact. I'll tell you that I looked at the data, I'll tell you what I liked, I'll tell you if I made a decision based on it, if I did not, and why. And then others raise both hands and say, and I'll even help you try and determine return on investment. Because for us, the output of what we're trying to do is we're trying to be one of those proof point production plants for some of the prosaic language I'm sharing with you now. You know, John said this, nice words, Chris, how do you prove it? We deploy in the real world, with real people and real businesses with real constraints. And we document technical, operational, financial, social, and then ultimately exponential impact when the asset becomes its own asset class.
I think it's worth pointing out that neither one of us has talked about 5G or 6LoWPAN or any other protocols or low-level radio connections or any. Those are all interesting. They all are relevant to building systems in IoT, and I'm sure they exist in basically all of the prototypes that have been built, that Chris has built, and that our organization has built as well. But that's not where the hard part is. The hard part is the people, and it's the social, financial impact, and so forth.
It's the endpoints, and so it's the digital endpoints.
Right.
How do you actually get a sensor to operate in an uncontrolled or semi-controlled environment, in dirt and diesel, where you don't have consistent power, and you don't have consistent communications, and you don't necessarily have highly trained individuals who are in bunny suits who understand that you can't drop coffee on or urinate on a device, especially when you're irritated with it. And then the other carbon endpoint is the human. How do you make this data, this intelligence, consumable? How do you make it relevant? And there's lots of really cool stuff in between that we can call analytics, or we can call machine learning, we can call artificial intelligence, and all that stuff's challenging and it's really hard, but I think the digital endpoints and the carbon endpoints in these networks are the places where most of the work needs to be done. And so that's why we chose to go to the real world where the carbon endpoints are, so we could talk to those people about deploying digital endpoints.
So I'm not saying we're not geeky at all. He just called people carbon endpoints. You are carbon endpoints. Just in case that was not clear, that's who he's talking about, you.
So we are, in a way, birds of a feather. He's coming at it, I think, with a massive organization. We've got 7 sponsors. They're mostly embedded technology companies. We've got a couple hundred small and mid-sized businesses. We've curated our platform down to about 1,000 early-stage IoT companies that we like. We've brought over 100 into the lab, and we've put a few dozen out in the field. And it's our hope and our intention that by doing this here in Greater Boston or Southeastern Massachusetts or New England, we can serve, in some ways, a complement to the Industrial Internet Consortium, maybe as one of the leaders. So we've been asked to come into all kinds of places, including the multinational coalition that's headed by the United States and Singapore, and includes a number of European nations, Middle Eastern and Asia-Pac nation states. And in the spaces and places we participate, we're finding resonance, we're finding echo, we're finding engagement in this thesis that with intention and intelligence, we can achieve profit and sustainability. We can maybe plow a third way. And that's all we're trying to do. It's small.
I think we're going to open it up for questions, but
We should do that.
I will just add The idea of our testbed projects was not necessarily to find ways to make money, but some of them have been so successful early on that actually the Bosch one I mentioned earlier was so successful early on that they are already rolling it out to their factories because of cost savings and increasing productivity and efficiency in their factories worldwide. I'm even allowed to tell you that they're rolling it out to one of their major customers, which is a large European airframer, but I'm not allowed to say which one.
Which one?
Let's see, one?
So in other words, what he's saying is, if you can pilot or test bed, then kits happen. That didn't go over.
I got it.
Okay.
Chris, what's the origin of the IoT Impact Labs? Where'd you come from? You with the labs.
Labs came from us wanting to prove that tier 2 through 5 markets, well, all right, the thesis is if IoT is the instrumentation of the physical world and the physical world is everywhere, and the challenges and opportunities are as well, then leadership can come from anywhere. Our obsession is with the decentralization and distribution of capital, of opportunity, of resilience. And we think that an appropriate digitization of the physical world can give us the ground truth about the physical world and can also be, in many ways, the tether to enable us to trust. Now, lots of big words, but the bottom line is we think the currency going forward is your deployment experience, your operating experience. So we needed to deploy, we needed to operate. We think there's been just too much talking and not enough thinking, some writing, but not enough developing and not enough deploying. There's a massive difference between the way a sensor operates in a laboratory and the way it operates in the field. And there's a massive difference between the way a city like New Bedford or a city like Holyoke operates as different from a city like Boston or Cambridge. If all of the experimentation, if all the test bedding and piloting happened in the places where you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a PhD from MIT or a billionaire from China.
Wait, that's the second
I know,
time.
I had to do it a second time. Honestly, it's my passion to try and do something that was more pragmatic. I cannot believe, I'll say it, I can't believe that I'm gonna leave my kids with a system that's based on false choices, do good or do well. To me, that's insane. We have too many tools, we have too much opportunity. My children should not have to choose between doing good and doing well. And I don't think they should have to choose between being where they want to be and where they should be. It's a mission. And so that's where the lab came from. We found a bunch of companies who agreed with us. They fund the lab. We found a bunch of startups who agree with us. And there are a lot of people that agree with us. And so
I'll just add, there's another piece of that, and that is, right now there are dozens of standards organizations worldwide developing IoT standards. They all look like middleware. And middleware technology has been around a long time. I happen to know because we, the OMG, created the first middleware standard in 1989. So that's not the problem. There may be some technical problems. There definitely are still some technical issues. But the real issues are people issues, carbon issues. I'm sorry. Yes, that's where the interesting problems are. And so when we looked at creating new standards in IoT, we decided it made more sense to build test beds first. And we were able to convince IBM, Intel, AT&T, General Electric, and who did I miss? Cisco, to come together March 27th, 2014, to build test beds together. And now 268 companies, large and small, and from all over the world, to work together and actually build those systems and learn from them.
and we can see him around the corner. He's a couple laps ahead of us. But
Chris, love your passion, and this is going to be a provocative question, I hope. At lunch today, a great group of folks, and one of the quotes was, as we move forward in this very connected world, the privacy is an illusion, and many people believe that actually it is a brake on possible progress, all the policy underpinnings on that. Really, probably not politically correct, but I think there's probably at least some discussion there. What's your thought on that based on, and I put that in the context of what you just mentioned about that false dichotomy between do what you love and do what you must.
So privacy is not dead, security is not a red herring. I'll just give you an example, and I shared this with John a little bit. Groundwater, it's a passion of mine. And so we have 15.1 million water wells in the United States and Canada. 15.1 million registered private water wells. Who knows how many that are not registered? Only about 30,000 have a sensor on them. The United States Geological Survey, National Groundwater Network has paid almost $20,000 per device, but only about 2,700 are available at any point in time. 15.1 million water wells. Now imagine if 99.98% of debit card holders at Bank of America never got a balance on their account. But that's exactly how we're operating with groundwater or sweetwater here in essentially continental United States and Canada. So, we own a small piece of a company that has a small device that uses sonar and pings that water well, and it's driven by PV, photovoltaic and batteries. And here's the point, you can know in real time exactly how much water is in your well. And as a homeowner, you can avoid pulling water past the pump, and the pump burns out, and that's expensive. And you can avoid pulling silty or mineral heavy water into your home, and that destroys infrastructure. That's cool. And if you're a farmer, you can actually know how much water you have so you can plan irrigation. And I'm gonna get into some detail, but a 2,500 square foot greenhouse where a farmer's growing microgreens, he has a harvest or she has a harvest every 7 to 10 days. That in a 2,500 square foot greenhouse could be as much as $1,000 in revenue at wholesale. Every 7 to 10 days, it's only $1,000 bucks, but if you're a small business, and here's the deal. If you can turn that 2,500 square foot, one turn every 7 days into one turn every day with the right instrumentation, that's awesome. But if you don't have water, you miss one water cycle with microgreens, you lose that $1,000 opportunity, whether it's every day or every 7 days or every 10 days. So if you're a grower, knowing how much water you have, you can plan irrigation. But here's the bigger point. What if all of the people who live on a specific aquifer that is under stress all have a sensor on their well? And every straw in that scorpion bowl, you gotta giggle on that one, right? If you can now stitch that and synthesize that data together from those different sensors on those different wellheads, you can actually model the aquifer. Now, everyone who operates on that aquifer can now talk about how they can better monitor, better manage, better optimize that shared resource. It requires a conscious decision to share certain data with a certain group. Now, somebody would say that that's a violation of privacy, but no, I opted in. But why did I opt in? I opted in because someone changed the conversation.
To avoid the tragedy of the commons.
And the point is, I'll just be clear, where I live, everyone irrigated twice a day in our neighborhood so they could have pearly green lawn. And I'm absolutely making value judgments. We have to. And 3 miles away, a whole bunch of small and mid-sized farmers had no water. But the homeowners were on town water. Hey, not my problem. Town water's running, without knowing that the aquifer that fed town water also fed the aquifer where the farmers were running their wells. But I can't convince my neighbors not to irrigate in the summer when these farmers don't have water unless I can prove to them the connections. And here's my point. If people have ground truth that they can agree to, then they will make conscious decisions to share only exactly what is required to achieve a specific goal. And here's the key. Not every sensor is a bit pipe. And this gets back to security and cyber-physical security and data science. You can look at different data points or data streams inside a single sensor and different metadata fields. You can actually make different subscriptions from the sensor. You don't have to push all this data up into a cloud and process it in the cloud. You can process different subscriptions, different extractions or exfills of data from a single sensor. And I can do that as long as we're not following Facebook with respect to digital rights management. If you can simplify DRM, you can empower people to make better decisions, and they will consciously share data and consciously give up some privacy. That's my position on privacy in this environment.
Yeah, so there's famous Scooter McNeely, right, who famously said, privacy, get over it. That's like 15 years ago now, right? I think that's only because the worst privacy breaks haven't happened yet. And just like the worst security breaks haven't happened yet. And it's not going to be, nothing's going to be fixed until that happens. But to Chris's point, you can't possibly make any decisions about security and privacy until you know what you're talking about. What information is available, what information should be available, those sorts of things. Everybody talks about Facebook because we have a generation of people that is willing to give up their privacy for a certain service, which is to get advertisements from Facebook. Well, that's what they're mostly getting, right? What's that? Staying in touch with friends, which was impossible before because telephones hadn't been invented.
So for a long time, this was the Holy Grail, right? You couldn't criticize Facebook because Facebook was the model, the same way you can't criticize Apple. We should be very harsh critics of the Facebook model. Freemium is Facebook's a dangerous model because a lot of people are putting a lot of time into screens and not into faces. They're putting a lot of time into likes and a lot of time into updates, but they're not in the field. I mean, it's proven that the reason why Mubarak took control of Egypt was because the kids who participated in social media put pressure on the global infrastructure to recede their support for him. Didn't actually get in the street and fight for Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood was prepared to fight for Egypt, but the kids on Facebook were not. My point is, they're not even curating news on Facebook. They're wanting people to get on Facebook to put their time in screens, publish, 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 subscribe, 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 but no depth, no second level thinking, no true engagement. It's about affinity. It's about advertising.
Not editing.
Truth. It's not about value. And we, I think in IoT, suffered 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago because a lot of social and mobile and freemium models started to bleed into the early stage IoT companies.
Because they were all consumer. I think that's a really important thing to point out. They were consumer solutions, whereas what we're both talking about are industrial solutions. I don't mean industrial manufacturing. I mean they're industrial in size, they're industrial in scope, and they're in industries that are essentially today still unaffected by the internet. And in that industry, it's different. And you're starting to see that bleed into the consumer market also. A great example would be Amazon Echo or these LG televisions that only listen to you when you're giving them commands. That actually was the official statement by LG when somebody said, wait a second, when is that television listening to me? And they said, don't worry, it's only listening to you when you give it commands. So yeah, that's a pretty good trick. I guess it reads your mind too. I have an Amazon Echo, so I understand how valuable they can be. But we're starting to see people respond to the lack of privacy. To Sophie's point in the last session, actually, they figured it out a lot earlier in Europe, not so much Belgium, but Germany, which has one of the strongest data privacy laws in the world. Of course, they didn't figure it all out because the first thing that happened when that data privacy law was put in place was every data center in Germany fled somewhere else.
If you want to get frightened by privacy, read a book called The Circle by David Eggers. People read that. One of the quotes in there, is privacy is greed, but it's a very frightening book because it's totally real.
That there are almost no rules in this thing called IoT right now because it is so young. The rules are for us to make, and so I would just, because we only have a couple more minutes, people ask me, what's the parting shot? The parting shot is, what do you want, how do you want to be? Forget how to get connected, how to get things connected, how to get assets connected, how to get resources connected. We need to ask ourselves, how do we want to be connected? It will be digitization. We will be in this synthesized space with digital endpoints.
And there are good reasons for it. But I'll let you some, but I think it's really important to realize there are good reasons for it. One of the things that we're designing that may or may not be a test bed in the near future, but just to spill the beans a little bit for the recorders that are not recording, is if you could track all of the apparatus on people in hospitals in real time, which you can do today, right, in all the hospitals in a large country, you could actually track the wavefront of a disease moving across that country and make sure that the right antibiotics or antivirals are developed at the right time and delivered to the right place ahead of that wavefront of the public health menace that's on its way to the next part of the country. Right, so it clearly has value, has impact on the transportation system, the logistics system, the healthcare system, all sorts of things. But that's pretty personal data coming off of all those patients in hospitals that you
but it's a different intention.
It's a different intention, but my point is you're going to want to have some rules in place that are not IoT rules. They're rules about privacy that are going to require anonymization, aggregation, and so forth. A non-disambiguable anonymization.
And you bring up maybe the greatest point, which is I think IoT is a concept as it's not an industry, it's not a market, and as a concept I think it fades by 2020.
I agree.
Because you talk about putting these sensors in places where it's diesel and dirt and not a clean room, not a controlled environment. What's the most surprising result that you found in these real world applications? I know you're
I've got one. You could too. You do yours.
You know, fishing boats and say underground and whatnot. Is there something that you weren't expecting? Some surprising result that was?
Large amounts of data always have unexpected surprises in them. You want a minute to think? I'll tell mine.
You go first. I'm trying to think about what I can share.
We have a project as I mentioned, in Cork. County Cork is essentially a province of Ireland. The test bed is quite simple. It connects the city resources of the city of Cork with the county Cork IT resources with the national resources of the nation of Ireland. And the first test that ran on it integrates the national healthcare resources of Ireland with the county resources that manage the ambulance system. So when the ambulance is on its way to your house, if they know whose house they're going to, they've already uploaded to the ambulance directly and the med techs in the ambulance your health records, so they know if you have diabetes or high blood pressure or Alzheimer's or whatever, and can treat you properly. And the opposite. So if you've ever seen a handoff in an ER, emergency room, emergency ward, it's a very painful handover between the med techs, the paramedics, and the nurses and doctors at the hospital. The idea here was they can update your health records on the ambulance. It automatically goes back to the hospital and the national health records. So obviously useful, but when I visited about a year ago, they said they were having a problem. The ambulance drivers were about to go on strike. I said, why? Do they think they're French? Anyway. The problem was that they had put GPS trackers on all the ambulances to ensure that they would send the closest ambulance to the problem, obviously. And so a large amount of data came in, and they realized that some ambulance drivers were spending a little extra time at coffee houses. I said at least it was coffee houses. They asked if I had any ideas, because the ambulance drivers were requiring that the GPS devices be removed from the ambulances, which would destroy that entire test. And I said, sure, close down the garages and buy them parking spaces at the coffee houses. What do you care where they are? As long as they get to the site as quickly as possible. In fact, you could take the first year of data, or you could do it dynamically, change it every day to see where the problems are. You could guess that it's the old folks' homes and the dangerous intersections or whatever, but don't guess. Take the data that you've got from the ambulance calls over the last 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, a year, whatever, and choose coffee houses near there, buy parking spaces near those coffee houses, give them coupons for those coffee houses. As long as they respond immediately when they're called, who cares where they sit? Not just coffee houses, but anywhere. And I mean, this was a revelation. They had always had the ambulances come back to the garage or back to the hospital. So my point is there are always unexpected results, and they're always from the quantity of data that nobody had thought about before.
So I'll tell another human story. It's not so sexy with respect to location and such, but commercial fishermen, we're in New Bedford. We're doing a lot of work supporting the NOAA effort to grow the privately sourced data for the NOAA Science Center and fisheries research. And so fishermen are notorious for not wanting to be surveilled. But what we found was that they actually accepted the idea that if we could put a flow meter or a pressure sensor or transducer on their hydraulic cylinders, that they would love to have the digital pin that showed the start of them setting their gear and the stop of them setting their gear with temporal and geospatial rectification, so they could know exactly when they started to set and exactly when they stopped to set and exactly how long the gear was out, and then exactly when they started to haul the gear and then when they ended the haul of the gear. It gives them very high pedigree on exactly when and where their gear was dredging or dragging. And they would be happy with personally identifiable information excluded and the de-identification and all kinds of other abstractions, time and space and all kinds of other conditions. They'd be happy to share that data with NOAA so that they could be active participants in the resurgence of, I'm not gonna say crowdsourced, but pedigree crowdsourced for fish stock assessment, catch share allotment, and bycatch mitigation, the policies, rules, regulations. In other words, they want to be active participants in better science. They're happy to be quote unquote surveilled as long as it's event-based, as long as there's pedigree, there's security, there's privacy. They're happy to have more sensing and instrumentation on their boats as long as they're in control. We were shocked and we're thrilled because we're trying not to break our necks hopping from boat to boat.